It began as a whisper on the wind, just a faint, trembling sound caught on an old recording device deep in the hills of northern England. Locals said it was static. Others swore it was a woman's voice, sobbing, pleading, echoing through the night. But when the audio was analyzed, the voice matched something impossible. The spectral frequencies of a human cry recorded exactly 102 years earlier, from a woman who died in 1923. Who was she? How could her voice return after a century of silence? And what if sound, like memory, never truly dies, but lingers waiting to be found again? This isn't a ghost story. It's a story about how history speaks, sometimes quite literally, through the noise we think we've forgotten. And tonight, you'll hear her voice for yourself. Chapter 1: The Night of the Recording. It started on an ordinary evening, the kind of quiet, empty night when even the wind seems to hesitate before moving. A small group of sound hobbyists had gathered near the edge of a forgotten valley in North Yorkshire. They were testing new audio gear, high-sensitivity field recorders meant to capture the distant howl of foxes, the rustle of trees, maybe even the hum of passing trains. But what they captured that night wasn't wildlife. At precisely 11:47 p.m., one of the microphones picked up something faint. A soft, shuddering cry, like someone calling out from a great distance. It rose, cracked, and then faded into the static. The men froze. There were no houses for miles, no lights, no reason for a human voice to exist out there. They replayed the audio over and over, certain it must be interference, a radio bleed, a prank, something explainable. Yet the pattern of sound waves told another story. The frequency matched not machine noise, but a human throat. One of them whispered, "That sounds like she's crying." And as if the air itself were listening, the wind shifted, carrying a faint echo through the trees. The same voice, one more time. Only later would they learn. That voice had been recorded before, exactly 1 century earlier. Chapter 2: The Forgotten Village. The village wasn't on most maps anymore. Hidden between rolling moors and the skeletons of old coal mines, it was a place time had quietly erased. A cluster of stone cottages with moss-covered roofs and empty chimneys that hadn't breathed smoke in decades. Locals called it Heroic Hollow. Back in the early 1900s, it had been a mining town home to fewer than 100 people. But after a sudden collapse in 1923, the mine was sealed, the village evacuated, and most of its history buried under silt, soot, and silence. Yet somehow people still came. Ghost hunters, historians, even thrill-seeking tourists with night vision cameras. They all said the same thing. Something about Heroic Hollow hums after dark. When the sound team traced the GPS coordinates of their mysterious recording, they realized the microphone had been planted just beyond the ruins of the old miners' chapel. The exact spot where, according to one faded parish record, a young woman had been buried with no known relatives. There was no headstone, no marker, just earth and ivy. Some villagers from nearby towns refused to speak her name. Others only whispered it when the fog rolled in, saying her cry could still be heard if you stood by the chapel at midnight. A cry for someone who never came back. And now, a century later, she had been heard again. Chapter 3: The Woman from 1923. Her name was Eleanor Hughes, though most people in Heroic Hollow never called her that. They simply said, "The girl from the chapel." Eleanor was 24 when she vanished. She lived at the edge of the village, where the woods grew thick and the mist lingered like breath over the moors. Her father had died in the mines, and her mother, locals said, went strange after that. Seen wandering the hills, whispering into the air as if answering voices no one else could hear. When Eleanor disappeared, the town assumed she'd run away. But days later, a group of miners found her scarf snagged on a branch near the sealed shaft, a place everyone was warned never to go. Some swore they heard her crying underground. Others believed the sound was the mine itself, old tunnels sighing as they collapsed in on themselves. A week later, her body was found by the chapel, soaked in rain, her hands curled tightly around a broken locket. Inside was a photograph, 2 faces, half faded by water. No one knew who the second person was. The coroner wrote exposure on the report. The priest buried her quietly, without ceremony. But something about that night, the way her mouth was open, frozen mid-breath, made people whisper that her final sound never left the air. Chapter 4: The Last Sighting. It was a Thursday evening, cold and damp, when someone last saw Eleanor alive. A shepherd named Thomas Greaves was bringing his flock down from the ridge when he spotted her near the chapel. She was standing still, too still, staring toward the sealed mine in the distance. He called out to her, but she didn't answer. She only lifted her hand, as if listening for something. Thomas later said it was the way she turned her head that haunted him, not in surprise, but as though she recognized something in the wind. He described hearing a strange vibration, low and deep, like a hum beneath the earth. Eleanor seemed to follow it, walking toward the sound, step after step, until the mist swallowed her whole. Thomas never saw her again. By morning, her cottage door was still open. A kettle boiled dry on the stove. The locket was missing, and on her writing desk lay a single page, torn from a hymn book. On it, in shaky ink, she had written, "It calls my name, and I cannot unhear it." For years, people dismissed it as a story twisted by grief and gossip. But when that same hum returned in 2025, captured by modern microphones in the very same valley, the old story no longer sounded like superstition. It sounded like a warning. Chapter 5: The Tape That Shouldn't Exist. When the recording surfaced, no one wanted to believe it was real. The audio file was uploaded to an online forum for amateur sound engineers under the title, "Unidentified Vocal, North Yorkshire Field Test." At first, it sounded like distant wind rushing through trees. But then came the cry, unmistakably human, trembling, raw. A woman's voice, breaking through layers of static. It lasted just 6 seconds. But those 6 seconds changed everything. The recording had been time-stamped, April 17th, 11:47 p.m. That date sent chills through one of the forum moderators, because that was the exact anniversary of Eleanor Hughes' death 102 years later, to the minute. Curious, a user ran the sound through a spectrogram, a tool that visually maps audio frequencies. And what they saw didn't make sense. The waveform contained patterns identical to an archived wax cylinder recording from 1923, one made by a traveling phonograph collector who, coincidentally, had once documented local village songs. That old cylinder had supposedly captured the faint sobbing of a woman near Heroic Chapel. 2 voices, a century apart. One spectral match. Experts tried to debunk it, claiming digital manipulation, coincidence, or hoax. But the engineer who made the modern recording refused to take credit. In fact, he swore he'd deleted the file. Yet somehow it kept reappearing. Chapter 6: The Sound Engineer's Confession. His name was Mark Ellison, a quiet, methodical man in his late 30s, more comfortable behind cables and screens than people. He wasn't a ghost hunter or a believer in the supernatural. To him, sound was math, not magic. But after that night, even Mark stopped sleeping well. He confessed, in a private interview months later, that something about the recording changed his equipment. The digital meters flickered, his storage drive glitched, and an entire directory of unrelated files suddenly contained copies of that same 6-second clip. Each file was slightly different. The pitch altered, the tone sharper, the cry closer. He swore he never uploaded it online. Yet the file had spread to forums he'd never visited. Even his colleagues received anonymous links with the subject line, "Can you hear her too?" When he tried to delete everything, the drives corrupted. He replaced them only for the sound to reappear after each reboot. In his words, "It's like it doesn't want to be gone." The final straw came when he played the clip one last time, late at night, through a pair of studio headphones. He said he heard something new layered under the cry, a faint whisper, almost inaudible, a single word, his name. After that night, Mark left his job, moved abroad, and stopped answering questions. But his hard drives never left the lab. Chapter 7: The Frequency of the Dead. Sound is more than noise. It's vibration, energy, movement through air. Every voice, every cry, leaves a trace. Even after silence, the waves linger for a fraction of a moment, bouncing off walls, trees, water, and sometimes people. But what if some sounds never truly fade? That question haunted Dr. Lila Brennan, an acoustic physicist who'd spent years studying residual frequencies. The idea that emotional energy can imprint on certain environments. According to her, sound behaves like light in one crucial way. Under the right conditions, it can echo across time. When she analyzed the heroic recording, she noticed something extraordinary. The frequencies in the woman's cry didn't align with any modern digital compression or microphone profile. They matched analog decay, the kind found in wax cylinder technology from the early 1900s. In other words, the sound behaved as if it had been recorded a century ago, yet was captured on modern digital gear. Dr. Brennan's conclusion was unsettling. She proposed that certain frequencies, especially those born from intense human emotion, might become trapped within physical spaces, resonating indefinitely until reactivated by similar vibrations. She called it the persistence field. Skeptics dismissed it as pseudoscience. But she wasn't the only one hearing patterns from the past. Because a week later, another team picked up the same sound, 30 miles away. Chapter 8: Ghosts in the Wavelength. When the second recording surfaced, it came from a completely different team. A group of paranormal researchers testing EVP equipment near an abandoned railway tunnel in Whitby, miles from Heroic Hollow. Their devices weren't designed for wildlife or ambient sound. They were built to capture electronic voice phenomena, alleged voices of the dead embedded in radio static. Most nights, the recordings turned up nothing more than crackling wind and shifting frequencies. But not this time. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the same minute as the heroic recording, one of the EVP units spiked. A voice came through the static, trembling, fractured, unmistakably human. The researchers froze as the waveform drew across their monitors in real time. When they played it back, the cry was identical to the one caught in the valley. Same pitch, same emotional contour, same 6 seconds. And at the end, a faint whisper. "Please, don't shut the door." When Dr. Brennan reviewed both clips side by side, she noticed they shared the same resonance pattern, like the same voice vibrating through two locations simultaneously. That defied every known law of acoustics. The media never covered it. The researchers stopped publishing their findings. And within a month, 3 of their recording devices had vanished. Files wiped clean, as if something didn't want the voice traced again. But one copy remained, and what it revealed next wasn't human. Chapter 9: The Phantom Signal. The surviving copy was analyzed by a communications lab in Manchester, a facility that usually dealt with satellite interference, not ghosts. Their team labeled it simply Signal X47. At first, the waveform looked like a typical audio file. Jagged peaks, scattered noise. But as the technicians zoomed in, they noticed something impossible. A repeating digital signature buried in the background hum. It wasn't random. It was patterned. Every 6 seconds, the same duration as the cry, a low-frequency pulse emerged, precise and rhythmic like Morse code without spacing. When converted into data, the sequence translated into a geometric shape. A spiral mirrored perfectly on both axes. Dr. Brennan was called in again. She recognized the pattern instantly, not as sound, but as resonance mapping, something that naturally occurs when waves reflect endlessly inside enclosed spaces. In other words, it looked like an acoustic fingerprint of the mine itself. But that couldn't be. The shaft had been sealed for a century. When the lab overlaid the spiral pattern onto the mine's old blueprints, the alignment was exact, down to the chamber where Eleanor's father had died. That's when the technicians realized the sound wasn't traveling through the air. It was traveling from beneath it. Chapter 10: The Historian's Warning. The deeper the researchers dug, the more impossible the story became. And that's when Arthur Penley, a local historian in his 70s, stepped forward with a quiet warning. "You're not the first to hear her." Penley had spent 40 years cataloging forgotten mining villages across Yorkshire. When he heard of the heroic recordings, he invited the team to his cluttered study. A dim room stacked with weathered journals, parish records, and letters dating back to the early 1900s. He slid a brittle, yellowed page across the desk. It was an excerpt from a miner's diary, dated April 1923. The handwriting trembled, but the words were clear. The voices came again tonight. Down in the shaft. One of them sounded like Hugh's girl. The diary had been written 2 days after Eleanor's death, meaning the miners claimed to hear her after she was gone. Penley explained that locals believed the mine was cursed long before Eleanor vanished. They said the tunnels carried more than echoes, that grief itself had become part of the earth. He looked the researchers dead in the eye and said, "You think you've recorded something new. You haven't. You've just tuned into the same grief that's been screaming underground for 100 years. Then he paused, voice dropping to a whisper. And every time someone listens, it gets louder. Chapter 11, The Photograph. 2 weeks after meeting Arthur Penley, one of the researchers received a brown, unmarked envelope in the post. Inside was a single black and white photograph, slightly warped by age and water stains. No note, no return address. At first glance, it looked ordinary, a group of villagers posing near the chapel sometime in the early 1920s. But when magnified, something in the far corner caught the team's attention. A young woman, half turned toward the camera, her expression blurred, as if she'd moved the moment the shutter clicked. Her features matched the only known sketch of Eleanor Hughes. What truly unnerved everyone, though, wasn't her face. It was what appeared behind her. In the chapel doorway, barely visible through the grain, a faint distortion ran across the image, like ripples on glass. When enhanced digitally, it revealed a faint streak of white, a shape resembling a sound wave suspended in the air. The metadata analysis showed the photograph had been taken with a Kodak #1 camera, the same model owned by the phonograph collector who recorded the original Cry in 1923. Different medium, same moment. It was as if the camera had captured more than light, as if it had frozen vibration itself. And the most chilling part? The timestamp on the back of the photograph read, Chapter 12, The Cry Decoded. When the photograph surfaced, Dr. Lila Brennan decided it was time to go deeper, to break the 6-second cry down to its rawest form. She brought the recording into a sound isolation chamber at her university, a place so silent you could hear your own heartbeat in your ears. Then she loaded the file into her analyzer and slowed it down by a factor of 1,000. What she found didn't sound like noise anymore. Underneath the obvious cry was a sequence of microtonal pulses, short, rhythmic bursts spaced too evenly to be natural. When she converted the frequencies into numerical data, they formed a repeating pattern. April 17, 23. The exact date of Eleanor's death. At first, she assumed it was coincidence, or perhaps a case of audiopareidolia, where the brain imposes meaning on random noise. But as she filtered deeper into the lower ranges, another layer emerged. A faint harmonic that resembled a human breath. And then came something impossible. Embedded in the waveform spectrogram, when converted into visual form, was a shape. Not a random curve or spike, but a clear, ghostly outline of a face. It wasn't fully human, too stretched, too blurred. But the eyes were unmistakable. Dr. Brennan shut off the monitor, backed away, and whispered the same words Eleanor once wrote in her note. It calls my name. Chapter 13, Patterns in the Static. After Dr. Brennan's discovery, reports began surfacing from all over northern England. Radio operators, podcasters, even wildlife enthusiasts started noticing strange distortions in their recordings. Brief bursts of static that, when isolated, carried the faint shape of a woman's cry. At first, no one connected the dots. But when Brennan's team ran the clips through a spectrum analyzer, every file displayed the same eerie pattern. A mirrored resonance identical to the heroic sound. The strangest part? Each clip had been recorded at precisely 11:47 p.m., regardless of the date, time zone, or device. It didn't matter whether it was an analog radio in a farmhouse or a smartphone left on a windowsill. The same frequency spike appeared again and again, always tied to that moment in the night. The phenomenon spread like a digital infection. Online communities started referring to it as the echo code. Some claimed their devices replayed the sound even when unplugged. Others said they could feel a vibration before it played. A hum beneath the floorboards, like something waiting to be heard. Then came the reports from those who listened too long. They described dreams of standing in darkness, hearing the same cry, and seeing a figure at the edge of their vision, mouth open, face half-faded. By then, Brennan realized the truth. The sound wasn't traveling across networks. It was traveling through us. Chapter 14, The Midnight Broadcast. The sound was never meant to reach the public. But late one night, it did, live, unfiltered across the airwaves. On May 2nd, 2025, a local radio station in York was airing its usual midnight talk show when the host, Simon Dale, noticed something strange on his monitor. A signal spike, faint but steady. His technician shrugged, probably interference. But within seconds, the static on Channel 3 grew louder, forming what sounded like a soft, rhythmic sob. Then came the cry. Listeners flooded the phone lines. Some thought it was a prank. Others said it made their chest tighten, their vision blur. The station's equipment glitched violently. Meters flashing, microphones shorting, before everything went silent. 30 seconds later, the backup feed restored itself. But the damage was done. Thousands had heard it. Social media exploded with the hashtag Midnight Cry. Clips from car radios, live streams, and baby monitors surfaced online, all playing the same 6-second sound. But there was one terrifying detail no one could explain. Every recording of the broadcast contained something new. A whisper beneath the main audio track. Different words depending on who listened. Some heard, "Help me." Others, "I'm still here." And one listener claimed he heard something else entirely, his own name. After that night, the station went off air. Simon Dale never returned to work. Chapter 15, The Scientist Who Listened Too Long. Dr. Lila Brennan had warned everyone not to play the recording directly through headphones. She said the resonance wasn't just heard, it was felt. But not everyone listened. Dr. Matthew Crane, a neuroscientist from Oxford, believed the cry phenomenon was a perfect case study in auditory hallucination and suggestibility. To him, there was no ghost, just the human brain tricked by pattern recognition and grief. So he decided to run his own test. He isolated the cry, looped it continuously, and played it inside a soundproof lab for 6 hours straight. Alone. When he didn't check in the next morning, security found him still inside, awake, but unresponsive. The headphones were off, yet his head was tilted, as if still listening. He could speak, but only in short bursts, repeating a single phrase. "She's closer now." His brain scans showed abnormal activity in the temporal lobe, the region responsible for processing sound and emotion, as though he'd been hearing something after the playback ended. For weeks, he remained in a state between awareness and trance. Then one night, he began humming. The pattern matched the harmonic tone buried in the original recording. Pitch perfect, note for note. Dr. Brennan's conclusion was chilling. It's not just sound, it's transmission. Whatever that frequency carried, it had found a new voice. Chapter 16, The Mirror Experiment. By the summer of 2025, curiosity had turned into obsession. Universities, online forums, even private research groups wanted to understand the cry phenomenon. Most simply replayed the sound. But one team, led by psychologist Dr. Helena Voss, took it a step further. She wanted to know if the voice could manifest visually. Her theory was that extreme emotion in sound might trigger something called acoustic pareidolia, where the brain fills visual blanks when exposed to powerful frequencies. So she built a test chamber lined with mirrors, designed to reflect both light and low-frequency vibration. Participants were instructed to sit in silence while the 6-second cry played on a loop. The lights were dimmed to near black, and each subject was filmed from multiple angles. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then one volunteer, a young man named Felix, began breathing heavily. He said he could see movement, not in the mirrors themselves but behind them. Within moments, the others reported the same thing. A shadow forming where no reflection should exist. The footage showed faint distortions, flickers of white streaks, pulsing in sync with the cry's waveform. Then the final playback cut abruptly. The mirrors in the chamber had cracked outward, from the inside. Dr. Voss ended the experiment immediately. Her closing remark was simple, almost whispered. "She's not showing herself. She's remembering herself." Chapter 17, The Girl Who Dreamed in Echoes. Not far from Heroic Hollow, in the small town of Ravensmere, a 9-year-old girl named Lydia Marsh began having strange dreams. She told her parents she kept hearing someone crying in her sleep. But it wasn't just any cry. It was always at the same moment, 11:47 p.m. Her parents assumed it was night terrors, until Lydia started describing details she couldn't possibly know. The chapel on the hill, the sound of the mine collapse, even a woman in a long, soaked dress holding a broken locket. When her drawings were shown to local historians, one detail stood out. The woman's face was nearly identical to Eleanor Hughes. Dr. Brennan was brought in quietly to observe. During one monitored sleep session, she placed an ambient microphone in Lydia's room. At 11:47, the girl stirred, murmured something, and whispered a phrase none of the adults recognized. When translated later from a 1900s Yorkshire dialect, it meant, "The door won't stay shut." The most unsettling part came afterward. When the team replayed the audio, they noticed a faint secondary voice, older, raspier, repeating the same words in perfect sync. Brennan's note in her report was brief, but it said everything. The resonance has chosen continuity. She's speaking through memory now. And Lydia? She never dreamt in silence again. Chapter 18, The Church Bell Theory. After Lydia's case, investigators noticed something peculiar. The cry always coincided with faint bell reverberations in the background of the recordings. At first, they assumed it was interference, maybe from a distant clock tower or machinery. But when they compared audio from different nights and locations, the same bell tone appeared every single time. Identical in pitch, echo, and timing. That bell didn't exist anymore. It had belonged to St. Hallow's Church, the same chapel Eleanor Hughes attended, and it had been destroyed in the mine collapse of 1923. Acoustic engineers reconstructed the sound digitally, layering it over the frequency pattern of the cry. What they found was astonishing. The tones harmonized perfectly, creating a waveform that looked like a heartbeat when visualized on the spectrum. Dr. Brennan's team theorized that the bell and the voice were somehow entangled, one amplifying the other through resonance. The church bell, they said, wasn't just ringing for prayer. It was ringing through time. Local clergy had a different view. Father Donnelly, keeper of the surviving chapel records, simply said, "If a soul dies with its prayer unanswered, it'll find the sound it prayed to." Maybe the bell wasn't just an artifact. Maybe it was the tether, the last sound Eleanor heard before she vanished beneath the earth. Chapter 19, The Digital Seance. By late 2026, curiosity had turned into collaboration. Tech enthusiasts, paranormal researchers, and AI developers began merging their tools to speak to the voice. They called it Project Echo Glass. The goal was simple: feed Eleanor's recorded cry, along with every known ambient sound from Heroic Hollow, into an advanced voice synthesis program. If there was any linguistic pattern or hidden data in the frequencies, the AI would reconstruct it. The first test produced nothing but distortion. The second produced words. A faint phrase emerged from the static, repeating 3 times, "You shouldn't have called." The project lead, Dr. Adrian Cho, dismissed it as machine learning interference, until the code began to rewrite itself. Logs showed spontaneous edits referencing timestamps from the original 1923 recording. During a live stream demonstration, the AI-generated voice unexpectedly broke its own sequence and whispered something unprompted. "He's still down there." The stream cut abruptly. When archived footage was reviewed, a shadow could be seen behind Dr. Cho's reflection on her monitor, moving when she didn't. After that night, the project was abandoned. Servers were wiped, backups destroyed. But a fragment of code leaked online months later. An untraceable file titled echo_1923.wave contained one line of metadata, written in human text. She never stopped calling back. Chapter 20, The Man Who Went Looking. His name was Daniel Kerrigan, a retired geologist who had grown up hearing ghost stories about Heroic Hollow. He wasn't a believer, not until he heard the recording for himself. To him, the cry wasn't supernatural. It was geological. "Sound trapped in stone," he said. "A pressure pocket." resonance compressed over a century. So, in early spring, Daniel set out to find the mine where Eleanor had supposedly perished. Locals warned him the tunnels were unstable. The ground itself seemed to hum at night. But he didn't care. He wanted proof, not folklore. After 2 days of searching, he found it. A collapsed shaft sealed by warning signs and rusted fences. He set up microphones, sensors, and a small seismic reader. For hours, there was silence. Then a pulse. Not just vibration, but rhythm. Came every 6 seconds. When Daniel traced the source deeper into the collapse, he discovered an opening just wide enough for a single person to crawl through. He radioed his coordinates, crawled inside, and the transmission cut out mid-sentence. Rescue teams later found his recorder lying near the shaft entrance. The final 30 seconds captured Daniel whispering something in disbelief. It's not echoing. It's breathing. They never found his body. Only his voice, repeating the same cry, perfectly in tune with hers. Chapter 21, The Sound Beneath the Earth. When search crews analyzed Daniel Kerrigan's final recordings, they noticed something strange. The background hum wasn't random noise. It had structure. A repeating pattern buried beneath the static like a code. At first, geologists assumed it was the resonance of collapsing rock. But when they slowed it down by 300%, the waveform began to form distinct peaks, symmetrical, deliberate. It resembled human breathing. Dr. Brennan's team overlaid the data with the frequencies of Eleanor's original cry. The two matched almost perfectly, only inverted like a call and an answer. It was as if something below the surface was responding. Excavation teams were warned not to dig. The ground itself seemed alive with vibration. Instruments malfunctioned. Compasses spun. A low, almost imperceptible pulse rolled through the hollow every night at 11:47 p.m. The same moment the cry was first recorded. Old miners used to say that when a mine sealed itself, it meant the earth wanted to keep something in. And now it seemed that whatever lay beneath Heroic Hollow wasn't done being heard. As one seismologist put it, after listening to the slowed-down audio, if that's natural resonance, then the planet just took a breath. What if Eleanor's voice wasn't trapped in time, but in the rock itself? Chapter 22, The Resonance Effect. After Daniel's disappearance, reports started flooding in from people who had listened to the recordings, podcasters, paranormal streamers, even casual viewers. Many claimed to hear new sounds within the cry, sounds that hadn't been there before. When analysts compared older files to newer ones, they discovered something chilling. The waveform had changed. New frequencies were appearing. Faint, almost imperceptible voices layered under Eleanor's. In every case, those frequencies matched human speech patterns of living individuals who had recently listened to the recording. Dr. Helena Voss called it the resonance effect. The idea that Eleanor's cry wasn't just a haunting, but a viral sound capable of embedding itself into other voices, subtly altering the listener's vocal resonance over time. Some victims reported whispering words in their sleep that weren't their own. Others claimed they could feel vibrations in their throats while silent. In one instance, an audio engineer played the file backward to isolate the lower frequencies. The inverted track spelled out a distorted message. "Let me finish." By then, governments had quietly begun removing the sound from public archives. But it was too late. Copies had spread everywhere. Re-uploaded, remixed, rewritten into the digital bloodstream. The cry of 1923 was no longer history. It was becoming part of human memory itself. Chapter 23, The Vanishing Broadcast. It began as a late-night radio show in northern England, The Midnight Signal. The host, a man named Colin Reeves, wanted to debunk the legend once and for all. On live air, he played Eleanor's original recording and invited listeners to analyze it in real time. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then the signal began to falter, faint static, minor interference, the kind every broadcaster knows. But what came next wasn't random. A second frequency rose beneath Colin's voice, perfectly in rhythm with his speech. The more he talked, the louder it became, until two voices, his and hers, overlapped in uncanny harmony. Thousands of listeners reported the same thing at once. The broadcast began repeating itself before it ended, as if time were folding in on the signal. Then suddenly silence. The entire episode vanished from the station's archives. The live replay file corrupted. Even offline backups were unreadable, replaced by white noise that pulsed every 6 seconds. Weeks later, a listener uploaded a short clip from the show they'd recorded at home. In the background, just before the transmission cuts, Eleanor's voice can be heard whispering one word, almost tenderly. Remember. No one knows where Colin Reeves went after that night. Some say he's still on the air, just not our air. Chapter 24, The Final Frequency. By the time the vanishing broadcast made headlines, the cry had spread far beyond Heroic Hollow. Clips surfaced across forums, dark web archives, and even university studies, each slightly altered, as if the sound were evolving. Then came the discovery that changed everything. At a private research facility in Norway, an audiophysicist named Lars Nygaard mapped every known recording of Eleanor's cry, all 137 versions, and overlaid them into one synchronized waveform. When played together, the combined sound produced something no one expected. A pure tone, stable, balanced, almost beautiful. Spectrograms revealed an intricate geometric pattern, concentric circles resembling a pulse, centered precisely on 1923 Hz. That frequency wasn't random. It matched the geological resonance of Heroic Hollow's bedrock, the same mineral composition found only in that region. In other words, the sound wasn't haunting the Earth. The Earth itself was singing back. For a brief moment, as the tone stabilized, the sensors registered a surge, a signal that lasted exactly 6 seconds before collapsing into silence. When the playback ended, every instrument in the lab froze. And in the silence that followed, one of the monitors, the one nearest the speakers, flickered to life, showing a single sentence written in white text. It's open now. Chapter 25, The Door That Never Closed. After the Norway incident, all official investigations into the cry of 1923 were halted. Equipment was seized, archives sealed, and the public explanation was brief. Data anomaly. But those who'd been close to the research, Brennan, Voss, Nygaard, all went silent within weeks. Then, quietly, a new file surfaced online. It wasn't shared widely, just passed between researchers under encrypted channels. Its title was simple, Door.wave. When played, it contained no recognizable sound. Just a low hum, the kind you feel more than hear. But if you boosted the gain and inverted the signal, you'd notice faint footsteps, followed by a woman's whisper. He's home. Acoustic analysts confirmed something impossible. The waveform of Door.wave perfectly matched the final second of Eleanor's original cry. It was as if the sound had completed itself, the loop had closed. Or maybe, opened. Local residents of Heroic Hollow say that some nights, when the wind passes through the valley, you can still hear the faint echo of a bell. A single chime, followed by a woman's breath. Not a scream this time, just a sigh of relief. Maybe she wasn't warning anyone. Maybe she was waiting. And if you listen closely, really listen, you might just hear her whisper back the same question we've been asking all along. Who's calling now?